So how is everyone this morning? On a scale of 1 to 10, how anxious are you feeling? Are you feeling more and more impatient? Fearful perhaps? Even frustrated? Everything about this COVID-19 virus is so new, isn't it? We know more about it now than before, but we have so much more to learn. We do know the virus spreads quickly. We know that health workers are in short supply, as is the equipment needed to protect them. We know there's a shortage of beds, masks, and ventilators, among other things. We know that there aren't enough test kits, and we haven't been testing near enough. The numbers of cases in the country and around the world are scary, yet we suspect the actual numbers are far worse than what is being reported. We also know that despite wishful thinking, there are currently no drugs available to stop the virus. And so, as I said last week, we need spiritual practices to help relieve the fear and uncertainty we are feeling. These practices are not intended to sugarcoat or minimize the real dangers of the global health emergency. But my hope is that they can help alleviate our fears, at least a bit, and build up our resilience. Fears seem to come in groups, don't they? A fear about catching the coronavirus may be accompanied by other fears, like the fear of death, perhaps, or of losing a loved one. Perhaps it's a fear of isolation or bankruptcy that you are feeling. Buddhist teacher Lama Surya Das encourages us to address our fears and to work to transform them. In his book, Letting Go of the Person You Used to Be, he proposes a technique that I want to pass on to you this morning. First, try to identify your fears. Ask yourself, what is it that brings fear to my heart? Of course, you need to be honest. When it comes to the coronavirus, are you most afraid of death? Or pain? Or further complications because of the disease? Are you afraid of losing your job or your house or your spouse? Start with just one fear, whatever it may be. You can't analyze them all at once, so don't even try. Start by bringing the biggest fear you have to mind and prepare to analyze it honestly. Because this big fear of yours is a demon in your life. So you might as well face it and get to know it better. So begin to analyze what it is exactly that most causes you terror, and be very specific. As an example, let me try to describe my greatest fear when it comes to the coronavirus. Well, really, I have two. First and foremost, I fear losing my wife. And second, I fear losing my job. My biggest fear is that Susan will contract the disease and not survive. That's my greatest fear. But let's see if I can break it down further. I fear that Susan's age and some underlying conditions she has might exacerbate the situation should she get sick. I don't want to get too specific here, but suffice it to say that with a shortage of ventilators, I fear she might be denied access to one if she's placed in competition with someone younger. You see, I fear living alone without Susan. Better put, I fear living, period, without Susan. In my ministry, I've met a lot of people who lost loved ones, and as a result were thrown into deep pits of despair. Though at the time I could only witness the pain, I knew that it was real and raw. Again, I fear losing my soulmate and the pain that would bring. I fear being alone without her. When would I eat? Would I be able to eat? With whom would I talk? With whom would I laugh? With whom would I snuggle when waking up in the morning or just falling asleep at night? With whom would I share a piece of her amazing cheesecake? I fear these things. They may sound superficial, some perhaps even silly, but really they are symptomatic. Better yet, they are evidentiary of the strong grip Susan has on my heart. I'm also afraid of losing my job. I'm afraid of losing the money I need to survive. I'm afraid of losing my house. I'm also afraid of losing the special relationships I have built with members of the congregation. Following from this, I'm afraid I wouldn't get another job. What would I do then? I fear the process of hunting for another job. I'm afraid that I might have to give up a way of life that I enjoy. I'm afraid of the disconnection, the loneliness, the boredom, and the meaninglessness I might come to feel, all because of this pandemic. So what is it that you fear most in these troubling times? What is it that keeps you awake at night? Again, be specific. Because once you've identified the fear, you will be ready to start into the second half of the exercise, and that is experiencing the fear. Let me describe that process to you now. And again, I'm referring to the coping technique developed by Lama Surya Das. To start, allow yourself some time to experience your worst fear. For just a few minutes, imagine a worst-case scenario and go there in your mind. Put yourself in that situation. Imagine it. Visualize it. Tell yourself that this is what has happened. Don't run away from it. Don't panic. Don't avoid it. Just face your fear head on. See what habits, if any, you might have developed in an attempt to quiet the fear and avoid the worst. Do this, and I guarantee you'll eventually have a new perspective, more freed up energy, and a new lease on life, if only for a moment. If you're anxious about the possibility that you will end up alone without a partner, for example, see if you can access this fear. Think about what you might do to build a good and satisfying life on your own. Not better than the one you had, only different. The more we train to hang in there with our fears, even for the briefest of moments, the more we grow in breadth and depth. Training this way helps us loosen our attachment to excess baggage. In this way, we open our hearts and allow the world to enter in rather than be walled out, which is what we usually do with inappropriate defense mechanisms and irrational fears. Too often our fears become nothing more than old familiar habits. As young children, we may have been afraid of monsters that lurk under the bed, or of touching snakes, or of going into the basement alone. If, as adults, we hang on to these fears, or replace them with ones that are similar, we remain stuck. If you have a fear that is paralyzing your growth, it is unlikely that it will be transformed until you are firm in your resolve and are prepared to deal with it. Allowing ourselves to experience what we fear gives us the chance to meet reality face to face, and in so doing bring us greater freedom than we ever had before. Our spirits will be resurrected. Our anxieties will dissipate, even if just for a while. But it's a process. It's a technique we can use time and again to help build courage and resilience. So try it out, folks. See what this technique of facing fear can do for you. This is the hero's way, and I urge you, make it your own way. On another score, recall what time of year it is. And this is important. For Christians, it is Holy Week. For Jews, it is the beginning of Passover, a time when the faithful remember and celebrate God's deliverance of their ancestors from slavery in Egypt. Now, prior to this momentous event, imagine how desperate the ancient Hebrews must have felt, how fearful, how anxious, and how void of all hope. But in that singular event of their deliverance from slavery, everything changed. People started living lives of hope rather than fear. The people had been saved as God promised, and they were now on their way to a new God-promised land. Centuries later, in Jesus' time, conditions were equally desperate for the peasant class. It seemed that nothing much had changed from days of old. Again, people had been thrown into slavery, only now they were not only political slaves, but economic slaves as well. Slaves not only to the Romans, but through punishing taxation, to the Jewish aristocrats and the temple authorities who collaborated with them. People lived in constant fear. Peasant farmers lived in fear of losing their homes, their livelihood, and their dignity. More and more people were being thrown off their land for not being able to pay the exorbitant tax. Robbed of their land and their livelihood, they would become day laborers, even beggars. So where was their hope? Their lives were filled with fear and anxiety. Add to that, Jesus was in trouble with the authorities. They wanted to kill him for standing with the peasant class, for offering the poor a path toward justice, and a world and a life of mutual care and the restoration of dignity, if only amongst themselves to start. And right around the corner lay Good Friday, a day to be forever remembered as the day goodness died, as the day human fear overwhelmed hope. But the sense of abandonment would not last long. On Easter morning, 3 days later, a new dawn broke and hope was restored. A resurrection of body and spirit occurred. Once again, God's salvation came. People's dreams were saved, as God had promised. God replaced evil with good, and hope replaced fear. The darkness of Good Friday was pierced by the bright light of Easter morn, and the faithful resumed their journey toward a new God-promised land. Folks, we are now in Good Friday times. But Easter is only a short time away. The pandemic will end, and people will be saved. Your fears will ease, and your hope will blossom, I promise. So be well. Breathe in God's hope. Face your fears and keep your hope alive. Look forward to a bright future. Be courageous. Applaud the essential workers. Clap hands and bang pots. Hang another rainbow in your window. But most of all, love. Love yourself and love one another. And until we meet again, may God hold you ever in the palm of his hand.